The afternoon I learned how small I'd become in my own family. The bell over the door at Finch and Fable Books chimed to announce 3 strangers who'd followed the scent of complimentary Pinot more than the promise of a reading. One asked me where the restroom was. Another wanted a free bookmark for her niece who reads a lot. I stood behind a neat display of my debut novel, Late Bloom Hands, laced so tightly my knuckles shone, and told them the bathroom was down the hall past the children's section. My children weren't there to hear me read the first page I'd rewritten a dozen times. Oliver and Nina were somewhere outside the city, at a sound bath and brunch their other grandmother had orchestrated at Lakeview Retreat, organic smoothies, quartz bowls, eucalyptus steam. Aubrey Tamsin's mother posts everything with pale filters and gold captions. Family Restoration Day she'd written that morning under a photo of the grandkids in matching terry cloth robes. I am Eleanor Park Ellie to people who knew me before I graded 100,000 essays. I'm 62, and until last spring I taught American literature at East Shore High in Madison. After decades of scribbling encouragement in the margins of other people's drafts, I finally pulled the story I'd carried since I was 20 out of the drawer and into the world. Not a masterpiece, just a quiet book about a woman who rebuilds her voice after the noise fades. Apparently quiet didn't rate a calendar block. Oliver was 12 and Nina 9 when their father said he needed more air and moved out. Air can be expensive. I tutored at night, and on weekends took summer school every year and learned how to sleep on buses during debate trips. The money I didn't spend went to things I wanted for them: tuition, violin lessons. Nina quit after 2 summers. Oliver's club soccer. He swore he'd pay me back for once I'm promoted. I was dependable. Dependable isn't the same as visible. The launch was set for 2 p.m. on Saturday. I invited exactly 7 people: Oliver and his wife Tamsin, Nina and her husband Ben, and my 3 grandchildren Lucy, Theo, and April. Friday at dusk, the lake wore a bruised color and the geese honked like disappointed referees. My phone lit up with Tamsin's name, Ellie. I hate to do this, she began, and the sentence finished itself in my head. Aubrey booked Lakeview months ago. It's this immersive wellness thing, and Lucy is over the moon. Could we send flowers? We'll celebrate next week. It's my launch, I said as evenly as I could. The book took me 3 years. I know she cooed. Family comes first. Oliver slid onto the call to reinforce the thesis. Mom, you know how much Aubrey does for us. We can't ghost her. Of course, I said, and wrote the word ghost on the corner of a grocery receipt so I wouldn't forget how it felt. An hour later, Nina called. If it ends up just me and Ben, it'll be weird, she said. Maybe we should pick a day when everyone can come. There it was, the diplomacy of postponement, gentle, reasonable, and devastating. Saturday arrived drizzly, the kind of steady gray that makes the Capitol look like cardboard. I wore the navy blazer I'd bought for Oliver's wedding, dabbed on lipstick named Brave, and walked to the shop with a stack of author pens that never leave satisfying lines. Ms. Finch, who smells like bergamot and leftover paper, had arranged 18 copies of Late Bloom into a little mountain, a tent card with my bio propped at the base. Intimate events are often the best, she told me, refilling my water glass as though hydration could rescue hope. By 4 o'clock, I had signed exactly 3 books. One for Ms. Finch herself, one for a retired guidance counselor I once shared proctor duty with, and one for a stranger who said she admired my posture. I thanked each of them as if they'd pulled me from a river. I drove home with the box of unsold copies seat-belted beside me like a sullen child. My bungalow felt different when I opened the door, not empty exactly, but expectant, as if the furniture had scooted a half-inch closer to hear what I'd say. On the mantel, Oliver's graduation photo where I'm tucked behind Aubrey's silk sleeve. Nina's wedding where my head is a sliver at the edge of the frame. Birthday cakes where I'm holding the knife but not looking at the camera. A chorus of almosts. I opened the champagne I'd been saving and poured it into a chipped flute. Bubbles climbed in orderly strings and then broke with a soft hiss. People talk about revenge as if it's a temperature. What I wanted felt more like recalibration. Something inside me slipped into alignment with a click I could almost hear. Sunday dawned cold in bright sun winking off the neighbor's Prius. I brewed strong coffee and set a legal pad on the kitchen table. Teachers make lists when we don't know how to begin. At the top I wrote reckoning. Oliver's in-state tuition I'd covered around $44,000, not counting housing. Nina's private college closer to $51,000. My contributions to their weddings $12,000 and $16,000. Help with down payments $24,000 and $19,000. Small bridging loans for car repairs. Dental work. A dog surgery. I loved the dog for about $11,000. Most of it converted to silence. Childcare. 400 hours a year for almost a decade if you count the nights I slept on their couch so Lucy wouldn't miss me when she woke up. I began to total the numbers and stopped. The math was less the point than the pattern. I made the mistake of opening Tamsin's feed. Lakeview Retreat had photogenic eucalyptus, and Aubrey had photogenic grandchildren 3 under a gold-leafed caption, Favorite Grandma Day. Not only grandma, not also grandma, but favorite. I closed the app, which did nothing to close the feeling. Here's what my family doesn't know. I'm not precarious. The house is paid for. I built a sensible 403B by packing leftovers and pretending the staff lounge cupcakes weren't stale. When my parents died, they left a conservative investment account I never touched because knowing it existed felt like rest. And the ex-husband who wanted heir. The divorce decree required a modest life insurance policy with me as beneficiary until the kids finished college. He died last year, widowerhood by paperwork, and the policy paid out. $280,000 that I said nothing about, not because I'm secretive, but because I learned early that announcing money is the same as announcing open season. At 10 a.m., I called a lawyer I hadn't spoken to since the ink on the decree dried. Bowers and Callahan, a bright voice answered. This is Paige. Hello, Paige. My name is Eleanor Park. I need to see Ms. Bowers about updating my will. Of course, she can do 9 o'clock tomorrow. When Anita Bowers picked up, she remembered the launch before I did. How did Saturday go? She asked gently. It taught me what I needed to know, I said. See you at 9. At 11:05, I phoned Lakeside Trust. I'd like to establish education funds for my grandchildren. I told the trust officer, a woman named Corinne, whose vowels sounded like a piano tuned a hair too bright. And I'll need guidance on provisions. Tomorrow at 11 works, she said. We'll talk through options. At 2 p.m., I emailed my financial advisor, a careful person named Colin Reyes, who likes charts shaped like bowls. Colin, I wrote, I'd like to discuss reallocations and annual gifting. He replied inside 5 minutes with a slot at 2 the next afternoon and a note that said, also, how did the big day go? Even my spreadsheet person remembered. I spent the rest of Sunday doing something I hadn't done for pleasure in months, reading with the phone face down. Around 5, a text came from Oliver. How was the signing? I stared at the question, its smallness, its distance, and answered. Illuminating. He sent back a thumbs up, then nothing. Dusk softened the edges of the room. I called my sister June in Tucson, who has been inviting me for years to a guest room that somehow always smells like oranges. Ellie, she said, all sunshine. To what do I owe the miracle? I think I finally woke up, I told her, and explained about the bookshop and the brunch and the photos where I kept missing myself. June listened the way you only learn to listen after a divorce, and a move across the country quietly without trying to fix anything. What are you going to do? She asked when I ran out of air. On paper, make some appointments. In practice, stop auditioning for a role I already played for 30 years. She laughed, a sound that made me feel taller. My guest room is ready, she said, and there's a bowl of clementines with your name on it. After we hung up, I washed one champagne flute and left the other on the counter, a small rebellion against always finishing the dishes. The house didn't feel expectant anymore. It felt aligned. Tomorrow, I would sit across solid wood desks and speak in the declarative. The box of unsold books waited by the door, and for the first time since Saturday, I looked at it without flinching. They were still my words. I was still their author. And in the morning, I would begin writing the part of my life that didn't require anyone else to show up. By the time frost pulled lace on the neighbors' lawns Monday morning, I had decided that I was done narrating my life in pencil. I put on the same navy blazer from the launch, clipped my hair with a barrette that didn't match anything, and walked into Bowers and Callahan at 8:58 a.m., like a woman who finally remembered her own full name. Anita Bowers still kept the corner office with the view of lake water, the color of dented pewter. Her diplomas formed a determined grid behind her desk. She greeted me with tea that tasted faintly of roses and something iron. I read the notice about your event, she said. I'm sorry it wasn't what you deserved. It was what I needed, I answered, surprising us both. I'd like to rewrite my will. She opened a leather notebook. What are you thinking? Education trusts for my grandchildren, 3 separate funds. The money exists to open doors, not to pad weddings or buy lake toys. I want clear conditions, not performance, but presence. Her pen hovered. Presence. Real relationship, I said. Letters, calls, visits, not choreographed photo days. If they're old enough to sign for disbursements, they're old enough to maintain simple, honest connection with their grandmother. And if they can't, the funds revert to literacy programs. We spent 20 minutes translating yearning into clauses. Anita pushed for definable actions that wouldn't crumble under a judge's stare, monthly contact in any medium, attendance at 2 family gatherings a year, if invited, and able shared time that isn't transactional. She suggested a neutral trustee to avoid accusations of manipulation. I suggested 3, Corinne at Lakeside Trust, a retired principal who owed me a favor, and my friend Bev from the library board to assure no one person could be cast as villain. And your children, Anita asked gently. Specific bequests of $10,000 each. I said the words soft and steady. generous enough to be unmistakably kind, not enough to be mistaken for a reward. She looked at me the way doctors look at a patient who is describing pain and a plan. That leaves a remainder. Designated gifts to the Library Foundation, the Community Pantry, and the Humane Society. I paused. And the bulk to my sister June Parker. She has shown up, for years, without an RSVP. Anita took off her glasses and polished them on the hem of her jacket. Families are not obliged to be fair, she said, though we'll sometimes pretend they are. She slid a draft framework across the desk. We can have documents ready for signature by Wednesday. I will also prepare a letter you can share with the family that explains your reasoning in simple human terms, not legalese. Make it boring enough that only the people who truly care will finish it, I said, and she smiled. At 10:47, I crossed the square toward Lakeside Trust with a pocket notebook of phrases that still felt strange in my mouth. The trust department sat 2 floors up in a building that always smelled like unscented soap and old confidence. Corinne met me with her careful handshake and a stack of sample provisions. We're seeing more values-based distributions, she said, flipping through pages. The goal is to scaffold connection, not purchase it. I'm a teacher, I told her. I believe in scaffolds. We chose the structure 3 funds, 1 per child funded in stages to avoid a windfall that could flatten a young person. Disbursements for tuition books and learning experiences, summer institutes, music camps, plane tickets for study abroad. Each year's eligibility required basic contact and a short note, not graded, not judged, reflecting on what they learned that year and who helped them. A gratitude paragraph, I said, and felt my throat go tight. If the relationship requirements slip, Corinne said carefully, a gentle reminder goes out. If there's still nothing after 90 days funds allocated for that year, reroute to the literacy endowment you name. Make sure the reminder is kind, I said. Make sure it sounds like me. She clicked her pen shut and looked at me over the frames of her glasses. You're not the first grandparent to do this, she said, but you might be the first to design it as a curriculum. At 2 o'clock, I sat across from Colin Reyes, whose tidy desk looked like a still life of caution. He clicked to a spreadsheet shaped like calm. You want to increase charitable designations, establish the education trusts, and start annual gifts to your sister while staying under the exclusion, he said. That's all doable. Also, I said I want to simplify. If I'm managing 27 line items, the line items are managing me. He recommended consolidating 2 old accounts into 1 balanced portfolio, moving a portion into a donor advice fund. I could point toward the library and setting up automatic monthly widgets, his word for June. He raised his eyebrows when I approved without blinking. You're unusually decisive today, he said. I'm done letting other people's calendars write my life, I said, and he too smiled. By late afternoon, the air had the thin metallic taste that means snow is practicing. I walked home the long way past the bookstore where Ms. Finch was arranging a window of paper stars. She looked up, saw me, and pressed her hand over her heart. I lifted mine back, a small semaphore of mutual witness. My phone chimed only when I turned it over on my desk. Messages had been stacking like unwashed dishes. Tamsin. Hope you felt celebrated. We can plan something Instagram-worthy next week. Oliver. Hey, how did it go? Nina. Mom, call me Ben. Can pick up takeout and we'll swing by if you're up. Aubrey. A photo of the kids in robes already posted. We missed you. Next time, come treat yourself. I typed a single reply to my son, illuminating thank you. Then I set the phone face down again and read the chapter I assign juniors when I want them to notice their hearts beating. Tuesday morning, a sky the color of pencil shavings pressed low over the city. I needed to test the fragile idea that there were still rooms I hadn't entered. Madison Community Arts Center, an old auditorium with a new name, offered a Tuesday writer's workshop with 12 folding chairs and the kind of coffee proof that optimism returns weekly. The woman at the desk wore a cardigan the color of ripe pears and the smile of someone who likes putting people on lists. Advanced workshop, she asked, sliding a clipboard toward me. I'm working on a second book, I heard myself say. The first one just came out. That's a good sentence, she said. Keep it. For 10 minutes, we discussed tone and habits and how a person knows when the page has forgiven them. I left with a handout, a start date, and the warm, ridiculous conviction that strangers might be the safest first audience. On the walk home, slush crisped under my boots. I could see my breath. I could see the next few days arranging themselves into boxes on a calendar, signatures, notarizations, transfers, small, brave phone calls. It felt like choreography, like the part in a musical when everyone finally knows the steps. By noon, my phone was buzzing so steadily it sounded annoyed. Nina again. This time I answered. Hi, Mom, she said, bright and breathless. I heard from Oliver that the reading was quiet. Accurate adjective, I said. We were thinking if it was just us there, it would have been weird, right? Maybe we could set up a family dinner and do a reading at the house, make it festive. That's kind, I said, not necessary. She hesitated. Are you mad? I looked at the maple outside my kitchen window, bare branches holding a perfect pattern of nothing. I'm awake, I said. Awake how? Like when you realize the sound you've been hearing is the smoke alarm and not the dryer. I softened my voice. Nina, when was the last time you called just because you wondered how my day was? That's not fair, she said after a beat. I call all the time. You call when you need a recipe or a ride. Silence grew between us, then she exhaled. Okay, that's sometimes true. It's often true, I said gently. It's also fixable. I'll try harder, she said the phrase children memorize as if it's a promise. I told her I loved her and hung up before we circled the drain of apologies that would rinse nothing. At 2:20, the doorbell rang. Through the sidelights, I saw Oliver on the porch, one hand dragging through his hair the way it always did when he didn't know where to put his questions. He'd come straight from the office, tie-loosened coat, unbuttoned shoes, salt-bitten. Mom, he said when I opened the door, are you okay? I am not on fire, I said. Would you like coffee? He shook his head, followed me to the living room, where the afternoon light made the dust look beautiful, which is dust's best trick. He didn't sit, so I did. Tamsin's worried, he began. I'm delighted to hear she can locate that emotion. He blinked. Okay, that's a line. Sit, I said, patting the arm of the couch. He sat like a man about to negotiate borrowing a ladder. Look, he said. Saturday was complicated. We couldn't blow off Aubrey. I am familiar with Aubrey's gravity, I said mildly. Oliver, what's my favorite color? What? My favorite color. He searched my face for hints as if we were playing charades. Indigo, I said. Close cousin, what's my favorite place to eat? That Italian place you like, Romanelli's. I'm lactose intolerant, I said. Also for 20 years. It's Asteria, the little Greek place with the lemon potatoes you always steal from my plate. He scrubbed his hand through his hair again, a gesture that never grew up. I didn't realize. What kind of books do I read when no one is assigning them to me? Mysteries, courtroom dramas, and quiet novellas about ordinary people who change the one thing they can, I said. What do I do on Tuesdays now? I don't. He stopped. You teach your seniors. Oh, you don't. I joined a workshop, I said, and couldn't stop my smile. I'm writing my second book in a room where nobody needs me to bring snacks. He finally looked straight at me instead of through the fog of habit. Mom, I love you, he said. Even if I can't pass a pop quiz. I know you love me, I said. But you have been loving me like I'm furniture. Useful. Always there. The chair you bump into and then blame for being in the way. He flinched. That's harsh. It's accurate, I said. And I helped. I built a life out of saying yes. He was quiet long enough that the furnace clicked on and ran an entire cycle. Let us make it right, he said finally. Family dinner, a do-over. We'll celebrate you properly this time. Thank you, I said. No. He laughed a small, shocked laugh. No, Oliver. If your default setting is convenience, a scheduled celebration just becomes another chore on someone's spreadsheet. What I want is smaller and harder everyday attention. I want you to become a person who knows the names of the things that matter to me because you asked. He leaned back. Okay, he said too quickly. We can do that. You can, I said. Whether you will is the experiment. He stood, then sat again, then stood for real because standing felt like an action. Tamsin will not understand this, he said almost to himself. She doesn't have to, I said. You do. He hugged me before he left a long press of apology that accomplished the single thing. Apologies Kennett kept him there 1 heartbeat longer than habit would. When the door closed, I looked at the imprint his shoulder had left in the couch cushion and wondered how many years I had spent smoothing my life back to flat. Dusk seeped in early. I signed the draft letters Anita had sent over email and stacked them neatly beside a ceramic bowl that used to hold Halloween candy, then cough drops, then mismatched buttons. I printed a copy of the trust language that made my hands shake when I first read it, and discovered they weren't shaking now. The phone kept trying to swell into a crisis, texts and pings, and a voice message from Aubrey that included the word miscommunication 3 times in 1 minute. I silenced it and made the kind of dinner single people in books make an omelet with too many herbs and a slice of toast that ate butter like a solution. After dishes, I wrote 2 pages of new material for the workshop. The sentences didn't blister with brilliance. They didn't need to. They were mine. When the words slowed, I pulled a shoebox from the hallway closet and set it on the kitchen table. Ticket stubs, place cards, postcards from June with ink that always smudged. I made 3 piles, what happened, what mattered, what to keep. Near midnight, the house settled into its collection of small creaks. I left my phone in the living room on purpose and took a book to bed where I read until the words folded themselves into a blanket. Sleep came as if I'd earned it. The next morning, signatures, so many signatures. My hand cramped, turned drafts into documents. Anita notarized everything with a stamp that thumped like a gavel. Corinne walked me through the first transfer for the trusts. Colin sent confirmation that the donor-advised fund existed in the world like a bowl waiting to be filled. I left each office lighter, as if somebody had finally taken back a stack of overdue library books I'd been carrying under my coat. By late afternoon, clouds had wrung themselves empty. I cut down the side street by habit, which is when I saw Oliver's car idling in front of my house again, a little puff of exhaust fraying into cold. He didn't get out. He sat with his hands on the steering wheel like he was praying to a god shaped like a circle. I didn't knock on his window. I went inside, flipped on the porch light, a signal in one direction or another. I wasn't sure and stood in the hallway, listening for the chime of the bell I'd installed that summer so I could hear the mail arrive. It rang thin and definite. I opened the door to a white envelope addressed in Anita's paralegal's meticulous hand. Inside, a simple letter, the human version explaining my choices in calm fonts. I set it aside. If part 1 had been about noticing the absence, part 2 was about naming it. I had named it. I had underlined it. Tomorrow, I knew, would be about saying it out loud to the people who most needed to hear. Somewhere between now and then, somebody would decide that my boundaries looked like a crisis. Someone might pound on my door. Someone might finally ask the right question. I washed my face, turned off every light but the one in the hallway, and went to bed with the kind of certainty that hums. Outside the porch, light burned on, patient as a lighthouse. Inside, 3 signed packets, will trust letters waited on the hall table, quiet as instruments before a downbeat. The music would start soon enough. The porch light burned all night like a stubborn thought. By morning, frost had silvered the hedges and the hall table looked like a small courtroom, 3 signed packets stacked in a tidy fan, will trust letters. I made coffee. I read 2 paragraphs of a book about quiet revolutions and underlined 1 sentence. Naming a pattern is the first act of power. When I turned my phone face up, the day began pounding on the glass. Oliver. Can we talk today, Nina? I'm swinging by at noon. Please don't be out. Tamsin. I think there's been a huge miscommunication. Aubrey. No text, a link to an article called How Families Heal. At 10:03, I called Anita. 2 quick things I said. First, could you prepare a letter attesting that I was of sound mind when we signed yesterday? Second, if there's a simple cognitive screening you can refer me for, I'd like it on record. Belt and suspenders. She didn't ask why. Lawyers understand preemptive architecture. I'll draft the letter now and schedule you with Dr. Cho this afternoon, she said. And Ellie, good instincts. By noon, the sky had brightened into a pale, dishonest blue. Nina arrived first, carrying a bakery box and the air of a person trying very hard to be useful. She set the box on my counter and laced her fingers as if she were waiting for the teacher to call on her. Hazelnut torte, she announced. No dairy in the cream. I checked 3 times. That's a sentence you've never said to me before, I replied, and she winced. Mom, I'm here to fix. She stopped. I'm here to listen. It sounded like a line from a self-help book, but her eyes were naked with effort. Before I could answer, the doorbell chimed again. Oliver came in fast, Tamsin a half step behind, beauty marshaled like an argument. Ben trailed them with a neutral face and 2 mugs he'd clearly snatched from their dish rack. We inhaled the same square of air. All right, I said. Living room. Everyone sat except Tamsin, who paced a line behind the sofa like a litigant rehearsing the closing. Oliver glanced at the envelopes on the hall table and failed not to look again. First, I began, thank you for coming without the children. This is not for small ears. I waited for someone to breathe. Second, I'm going to tell you what I have done, not ask permission to do it. Oliver's mouth opened. I raised a hand. He closed it again. I updated my will yesterday. There are education trusts for each of the kids Lucy, Theo, and April funded in stages, so they don't inherit a catastrophe disguised as a blessing. Those funds are for school and learning. They have simple expectations attached, maintain a real relationship with me, and write 1 short reflection each year on what they're learning and who helped them. If the connection disappears, that year's allotment goes to literacy programs. Tamsin stopped pacing. That's manipulative, she said. You're buying affection. I'm refusing to fund neglect, I said quietly. There's a difference. Nina tugged her sleeve. Tam. I'm allowed to have an opinion, Tamsin said, eyes on me. This is cruel. Like scheduling a family restoration day over my book launch, I asked not unkindly. Ben's ears colored. Nina stared at her hands. Oliver leaned forward. Mom, okay. We hear you on the truss. What about... He nodded toward the hall table as if the papers might bite. The rest. Specific bequests to each of you, I said, and gave the number with the steadiness of a person reading a thermostat. $10,000. The bulk goes to the Library Foundation, the Pantry, the Humane Society, and to Aunt June. It reflects who has shown up without being asked. Silence shifted its weight around the room. I have never liked being the center of attention. It makes me feel like an actor standing under a light she didn't turn on. But this, I reminded myself, was not a performance. It was inventory. Oliver found his voice first. 10,000 is symbolic. Correct, I said. So symbolic it's insulting, Tamsin snapped. Ellie, with respect, we have planned. We, I echoed. She flushed. Oliver and I have planned around a likely inheritance. College. The kitchen renovation that keeps flooding. His business has an expansion opportunity next spring. Then I've given you clarity early, I said. That is more generous than ambiguity. Ben cleared his throat. Ellie, this is a lot to take in. I imagine so, I said. Take it in. Nina's voice was small. Are you punishing us? I shook my head. I'm rewarding what I value. Curiosity, reciprocity, presence. I looked from one to the other. I said yes for 30 years. It taught you could put me last. I don't say this to shame you. I say it so we can stop pretending that pattern was an accident. Tamsin folded her arms in elegant barricade. This is a power play. No, I said. It's a boundary. Power plays require an audience. Boundaries just require a door. Oliver blew out a breath. Can we start over? A dinner, everyone together. We'll make it special. You can do a reading. There will be a proper cake. Do-overs are just costumes if the people inside them haven't changed, I said. I don't want a gala. I want ordinary days where you remember I exist. Nina swiped at her eyes. Okay, she whispered. We can do ordinary. Tamsin opened her mouth again, closed it, and sat. That, more than any speech, felt like a tiny hinge turning. I stood, went to the hall table, and picked up the human version letter Anita had drafted. You will receive this by mail, I said. It explains my choices in calm fonts. It has nothing to do with my state of mind and everything to do with my state of life. I am not angry. I looked at Oliver. I am awake. The conversation unraveled into smaller threads, then questions about the trust mechanics, who the trustees were, whether the gratitude notes would be read aloud. Know what counted as a visit if someone lived far away. The same thing that counts as love attention. When they left, nobody slammed a door. Progress comes in increments so small you only see them when they add up. At 2:40, as if the universe had been waiting for a chorus, my phone started erupting. Oliver first, then Nina overlapping, then a number I didn't recognize. Mom, Oliver said when I picked up. We need you to come to Nina's house, now. Why? Because we found something and I don't know how to talk about it on the phone. Then text me a complete sentence. Just please, he said boy again, under the man, and hung up. I debated not going. Then I put on boots and the coat with the hidden rip in the pocket and drove across town through a light that kept changing faster than it should. Nina's living room held all four of them when I arrived. Nina, Ben, Oliver, and Tamsin looking like a painting of concern in four slightly different frames. On the coffee table, a manila envelope lay like an accusation. What I said. Nina picked it up with both hands and brought it to me the way children bring their mothers something broken. So, last night after we left your house, I remembered a key. When Dad moved out, he gave me a little brass key to a safe deposit box for emergencies. I stuck it in a junk drawer and forgot it existed. This morning it wouldn't leave me alone. Ben took over. We went to First Lake Credit Union. They still had the box. He glanced at Oliver. We opened it together. Tamsin pressed her nails into her palms and then unclenched them. It was full of statements and a letter. They offered me the envelope. Ellie was written on the front in a hand I hadn't seen in a decade. Patrick Hale had neat engineer script even when he wasn't engineering anything but his exit. The sight of it emptied my lungs, then filled them again. Do you want us to leave? Oliver asked. The fact that he asked was new. No, I said. Sit. I slid a finger under the flap. Inside, photocopies of account statements at 3 institutions I did not use, and a letter dated 6 months before his heart forgot how. I unfolded it and began to read. Ellie, it began, and I had to sit. If you're reading this, it means I didn't figure out how to say all of this while my mouth still worked. You always deserved better than my timing. I felt my face remain still while my hands remembered. The children watched me the way people watch high-wire acts. I failed at marriage and at the long work of fatherhood. Long work was never my talent. But I watched from a distance while you did it without complaint, which is a different type of failure, the kind that lets a good woman carry what was mine. There is money here. Some investments I made when I was trying to earn the right to call myself responsible in a life insurance policy you probably already know about. It will not repair what I forfeited, but it might build you a room with a door that locks from the inside. I have one ask. Do not give any of this to the kids unless they earn it by loving you the way you have loved them, not with gifts or public gestures, but with consistent presence that feels like weather. If they cannot do that, then let this money say what I should have said sooner, that having you is not a right. It is a privilege. I loved you confused as that love was. I'm sorry I made you live inside my confusion. Patrick. I reached the end and let the paper rest heavy as a damp towel. Oliver stared at the carpet as if it might translate something. Nina's face crumpled and then steadied. Ben exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since the word privilege. Tamsin's eyes were wet in a way that made her mascara gentle instead of dramatic. How much, Oliver asked in a voice that wanted not to be crude. Based on the statements Ben said, because he was the only one who could borrow a tone of numbers without sounding hungry, about 830,000. Not counting the policy Ellie already had. That can't be right, Tamsin whispered, then recovered. I mean, wow. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. It is right, I said. And it does not change anything I told you this morning. Tamsin's head snapped up. How could it not? Because money doesn't change love, I said. It only changes how loudly you can ignore that you're missing it. Nina moved closer to me, sat on the edge of the coffee table, in a way I would have scolded her for when she was 13. Mom, she said, voice wrecked. We didn't know. I didn't either, I said. Which tells you everything about the man who wrote it. Oliver wiped at his face in a way he would later claim was dust. What do we do now? You go home, I said. You think. You decide whether the relationship you want with me is about your lives or your accounts. Then if you choose the first thing, you start small. A call that isn't an ask. A Tuesday you remember contains me. And the money, Tamsin said, because someone had to keep us honest. It will be there, I said. If you figure out how to love me without needing a ledger to prove it. I set the envelope back on the table. If you don't, it will teach someone else to read. Nobody argued. That seemed like the day's second miracle. On the way home, the light went pewter again. I drove the long way along the lake and thought about letters that arrive exactly 1 year late and right on time. When I turned onto my street, my porch light looked less like a warning and more like an invitation. In the kitchen, I put the kettle on even though I didn't want tea. Habit can masquerade as hunger. The doorbell rang as the water began to murmur. I opened it to find June standing on my steps in a denim jacket too thin for Wisconsin and a face that made my stomach drop. Why are you here? I asked, and then heard how ungrateful that sounded. I mean, when did you get in? 2 hours ago, she said, stepping in and closing the door with a nudge of her hip like she'd lived in this house all her life. I took the first flight, then I took the first cab that would believe I didn't know your code. You could have called. I did, she said, and the look she gave me wasn't unkind exactly, but it wasn't gentle. You didn't answer. We stood in the entry like two women deciding whether to be daughters or mothers tonight. June's eyes went to the hall table, the fan of envelopes, the tidy battlements of my new life. She took a breath, braced her hands on her hips, and said in the voice that used to get me to stop lying about where I'd been at 16, Ellie, you have 30 seconds to explain why Dr. Levin's office has been leaving messages on my phone about appointments you apparently missed. I felt the teak floor tilt just a fraction the way boats do when someone steps from dock to deck. The kettle began to sing. I turned off the flame and didn't move it from the ring. June, I said. My voice sounded like someone else's, someone who had practiced how to be brave and now had to prove it. Come sit down. She shook her head. Not until you tell me what I think you're about to tell me. We stood there while the steam thinned into ordinary air. Outside, the porch light offered its patient circle to nobody at all. Inside, the house held its breath. The letters on the table waited. So did my sister. So did the next thing. Okay, I said, and led her toward the living room, the same place I had told my children. The rules had changed, the same place where I had finally said my own name out loud. The music was about to start. The music did start. June and I sat on the edge of the sofa like two women sharing one breath. I told her the words I'd been hoarding: pancreatic cancer stage 3, 2 rounds of chemo. I stopped. I wanted the months I had to feel like mine. I expected a lecture and got something fiercer: sisterhood with its sleeves rolled up. You don't get to do this alone, she said. Pick your team. The kids will turn it into a pageant, I said. Then teach them a different choreography, she answered, and that ended the argument. We texted Oliver and Nina tomorrow, 2 p.m. No spouses, my house. I slept the way you sleep before a presentation you can't postpone. They arrived looking like students who had skimmed the assigned chapter and hoped the quiz would be kind. I kept the explanation simple: diagnosis, timeline, what I'd tried, what I'd chosen. I did not offer the word brave. I did not apologize. Nina cried first quietly, the way tidy people do. Oliver paced the length of the rug and then stopped because motion didn't convert to control. How long, he asked, and hated himself for asking. I don't know, I said. 6 months was the guess before I stopped treatment. It could be less. It could be more. I'm not an equation. He sat. His knees touched the coffee table like punctuation. Why didn't you tell us? Because I needed to know who you were when you didn't think loving me came with extra credit, I said. Because I have been everyone's convenience for so long that I forgot love can be chosen. Nina scrubbed at her face. We choose you, she said, and for once the sentence sounded like something she'd carved herself. We'll drive you, cook, clean, sit, Oliver began. You'll show up, I said. Not as penance, as practice. Ordinary days. Texts without asks. Dinners with lemon potatoes at Asteria, because you remember what my body can't do with cream. And you won't talk about the will unless I bring it up. "Deal," he said too fast, then steadier. "Deal." They left with that newborn carefulness the living develop around the newly mortal. I made soup I didn't want and slept with the porch light on, not as a beacon, but as a boundary, my circle, my choice. In the morning, June drove me to Dr. Levin's office because she had appointed herself the team's captain. The waiting room plant was flourishing under fluorescent lights, a lesson in stubborn preferences. Oliver and Nina were already there with mugs of coffee that had not been doctored with cream. Small miracles arrive in paper cups. Dr. Levin met us with the calm of someone who had learned how to talk about endings without making them sound like failures. "We can review options," he said, "or simply talk about comfort." He paused. "We also repeated your scans." I braced. He angled the monitor toward me. Images bloomed in shades of storm and chalk. "I don't have scientific poetry for this," he said, "but the mass has reduced significantly, nearly 60%. Silence rearranged the room. Oliver said, "What, like a man who discovered an extra room in a house he'd lived in for years?" Nina cried the loud way this time, palms to eyes, mascara irrelevant. "I stopped chemo," I said, in case he had confused me with a braver woman. "I know," Dr. Levin said. "Bodies do as they please. Sometimes a change in stress diet sleep connection wakes up an immune system. I'm not promising anything beyond today, but today is better than last month." "Are you telling me I'm not dying?" I asked. "I'm telling you, you're not actively dying from this the way we thought," he said. "I'd like you to consider a gentler protocol. We can aim for years, not weeks. Hope is heavy when you've been training with resignation." I felt it settle, testing the furniture. "We'll try it," I said. "If it steals the days it's supposed to save, we stop." June squeezed my hand under the table, a signal we'd invented when we were 12. "I'm here. Say the thing. I'll hold the rest." The next weeks learned a new shape. The gentle protocol was gentler, not kind. Fatigue braided itself into afternoons, and I let it. Oliver started calling on Tuesdays to ask what my workshop had argued about. He came to pick me up afterward and did not hover. Nina discovered Asturia's takeout menu and the precise ratio of lemon to potato that made my whole body say thank you. She texted photos of sunsets without captions, the opposite of a demand. Tamsin, to her credit, stopped staging us. She came once with a bouquet from the farmer's market and no camera. "I don't know how to do this without making it a project," she admitted, standing in my kitchen without earrings for the first time since I'd met her. "I'm trying to learn small." "That's the whole curriculum," I said, and meant it. Lucy wrote the first gratitude paragraph, unprompted, 2 sentences with a drawing of my porch light and 3 crooked stars. Theo called to tell me he'd learned to scramble eggs without the eggs crying. April mailed a sticker of an indigo whale because she'd heard it was my favorite color. If love is weather, we had finally remembered how to forecast. The will stayed as written. I reread the human version letter and didn't change a verb. The trusts lived like scaffolds in my mind, not cages. Every time I worried I'd made affection transactional, one of the children would show up with nothing to ask for, only a story to tell, and the worry would set itself down. Patrick's envelope stayed in my desktop drawer under a stack of stamps. I read his letter once more on a day the rain wouldn't bother to be anything else. His apology did not absolve him. It did not have to. It had done what good apologies do. It changed what the money meant. Finch and Fable put up a winter window of paper constellations. Ms. Finch invited me to read One Snowy Thursday with 4 other local authors and a pug who snored through the poetry. I didn't invite anyone. They came anyway, Oliver, Nina, June, and the kids in boots too big for the weather they wanted. They sat in the second row, coats open, faces open, the way you sit for someone you love when the room is not about you. I read a small thing, a page from the middle of Late Bloom, where nothing dramatic happens except a woman changes a verb from past to present, and the sentence starts to breathe. When I looked up, Lucy was holding Tamsin's hand. Ben was laughing with his shoulders. Oliver looked like a man who knew what his mother's favorite color was, even with his eyes closed. Afterward, we went to Wisteria because certain endings deserve lemon potatoes. The owner hugged me like a cousin and sent out a plate I hadn't ordered because love like generosity insists. The kids argued about whether whales sleep. June told the story about the time we got locked out of our first apartment and climbed the fire escape in slippers. Benjamin paid without asking, and Tamsin took a photo only when we were laughing too hard to pose. On the walk home, the cold felt clean. Oliver hung back to match my pace. For what it's worth, he said, I'd take you alive, and broke over the richest ghost. He glanced at me. You can keep the trusts exactly as they are. They make sense to me now. They made sense to me before I said. I just couldn't hear them over the noise. We reached my porch. The light was on because I had turned it on, and because night had come. Both could be true. He kissed my cheek, awkward the way big men are with tenderness, and went down the steps to where his car waited exhaust, a small white flag. Inside, the hall table held almost nothing these days, a dish for keys, a library book, a folded scarf. The signed packets had moved to the safe. I no longer needed to exhibit them to myself like proof. I made tea I wanted and stood at the window while steam drew a ghost of a circle on the glass. The circle faded. The warmth did not. There will be more appointments. There will be days when courage feels like a coat that doesn't fit. There will be forms to sign and forms to ignore. The story does not end, it modulates. But this is the ending. I can offer a room where my name fits a family. Learning the steps to a quieter dance, 3 small people writing to their grandmother about what they learned and who helped a sister who knows when to fly and when to fold laundry. A son who can order the right dinner without asking a daughter who sends sunsets, like prayers in a porch light that is not a rescue flare but a welcome. At Finch and Fable, the bell over the door chimed as a stranger came in out of the cold and asked where the bathroom was. I told her down the hall past children's books, and when she thanked me, she didn't know she'd just stepped through a small doorway in the middle of my life. I turned back to the table where my book stood between 2 others and smoothed the cover with a hand that wasn't shaking. I am Eleanor Park. I am here. I am not invisible. And tomorrow, like ordinary weather, I will show up again. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.